What would you do if your husband's family laughed while leaving you a cottage, valued at $3, and called it more than you deserved? At 23, Martha Ellison had already buried her husband and lost the only home she had known. During the will reading, her wealthy in-laws inherited the farms, investments, and family house. Martha received Hollowbrook Cottage, a roofless stone ruin beside a marsh, burdened with unpaid rates, and a cellar door sealed with black wax. They expected her to refuse it. She accepted the deed. On her first night inside, Martha smelled rosemary and camphor rising through the floorboards. When she examined the cellar seal, she discovered the Ellison family crest had been deliberately scratched away, and someone had recently tried to open it. 3 days earlier, Martha had sat at the far end of a polished dining table while solicitor Alden Price read her father-in-law's will. Rain pressed against the windows of Ellison House, and the family's silver lamps cast a warm light that never seemed to reach her chair. Her husband, Samuel, had been dead for 8 months. A lung infection had taken him after less than 2 years of marriage, leaving Martha dependent upon people who had never forgiven him for marrying the daughter of a village healer. Samuel's elder brother, Percival, inherited the house, 2 tenant farms, shares in a wool mill, and nearly £9,000. His sister received jewelry, railway bonds, and a London residence. Martha's name came last. To my younger son's widow, Price read, pausing as though embarrassed by the words, I leave the property known as Hollowbrook Cottage, together with all chambers, fixtures, water rights, and contents within its stated boundaries. Percival laughed first. His wife concealed her smile behind a lace handkerchief. Someone asked whether the rats were included among the contents. Hollowbrook had stood empty for 37 years beside the marsh outside Brackenford. Its chimney had partly collapsed. Its well was believed poisoned, and its annual rates exceeded the value assigned to the building. Percival leaned toward Martha. Father has provided you a roof, he said. Assuming it remains above you. Martha did not answer. Her mother, Rebecca Hale, had taught her that cruelty often sought noise because silence gave it something to strike. Rebecca had served as a sick-room nurse and prepared simple medicines for families who could not afford a physician. Martha grew up learning the difference between feverfew and poisonous ragwort, how to boil instruments, dress wounds, measure tinctures, and recognize illness in the smell of a patient's breath. The Ellisons called such knowledge common and unsuitable, but it had allowed Martha to care for Samuel during his final weeks when his own family could scarcely bear to enter the room. Price asked whether she accepted the bequest. Percival expected her to choose a cash alternative of 3 shillings and leave without further claim. Martha studied the wording of the deed. Water rights was an unusual inclusion for a cottage beside a stagnant marsh. I accept Hollowbrook, she said. The laughter stopped for only a moment before returning louder. Martha signed the transfer and received a long iron key wrapped in faded linen. Percival informed her that she must leave Ellison House before sunset. Her belongings had already been packed into a small trunk. On the front steps, Price caught up with her and quietly warned that the cottage carried 18 months of unpaid rates. Unless Martha settled part of the debt within 30 days, the parish could order a sale. He also advised her not to enter the cellar. Why, she asked. Price looked back toward the house. Because your husband's family paid to have it sealed. Before Martha could question him further, he returned inside. She spent her final coins hiring a farmer to carry her trunk as far as Brackenford. From the village, she walked alone along a flooded lane while evening mist rose from the reeds. Hollowbrook Cottage appeared at the marsh's edge, half concealed by thorn bushes and a leaning ash tree. Part of the slate roof had fallen into the rear room. Moss covered the walls, and brown water stood around the foundation. Yet the front chimney remained sound, and one narrow window still held its glass. Martha unlocked the swollen door and entered a single cold room smelling of damp plaster, mouse droppings, and old smoke. She cleared the hearth, checked the chimney with a burning twist of paper, and made a modest fire from fallen branches. Her supper was bread softened in hot water. She had no bed, so she wrapped herself in her cloak beside the hearth, using Samuel's final letter as a bookmark inside her mother's worn herbal guide. Shortly after midnight, the fire shifted and sent a warmer current across the floor. With it came a scent. Martha recognized immediately dried rosemary, camphor, and spirits of wine. The unmistakable smell of a preserved medical store. She followed it to a warped cupboard beside the kitchen stairs. Behind the cupboard was a narrow door descending beneath the cottage. Black wax filled the gap between the door and its stone frame. An oval seal had once been pressed into the wax, but the crest had been scraped away with a sharp blade. Martha raised her candle. Fresh pale scratches crossed the old iron lock, and wet mud marked the lowest step. Someone had tried to enter the sealed cellar within the last few days. Then, from behind the door, came 3 slow knocks. Martha stood motionless until the last vibration faded. The knocks did not repeat. She placed her fingers against the wood and felt a faint tremor, followed by the quiet movement of air through a gap near the threshold. Whatever lay below was not a ghost. Something mechanical or hydraulic was shifting beneath the cottage. Her mother had taught her that fear became smaller when named precisely. Martha named what she knew: warm air, medicinal odor, fresh tool marks, wet mud, and a locked space her in-laws feared enough to seal. She did not attempt the door in darkness. Instead, she dragged the cupboard back into place, threaded a strand of black sewing silk between its feet, and tied the strand to a nail. If anyone moved the cupboard, the silk would break. She slept with the iron poker beside her. Ad-dam. The silk was intact, but a boot print marked the mud outside the rear wall. The heel carried a triangular iron repair, a shape too distinctive to mistake. The track led toward the lane before rain erased it. Martha searched the outside foundation and found a narrow copper pipe emerging beneath a thicket of nettles. It breathed warm vapor at regular intervals. Every third pulse produced a dull knock from inside the cellar. She needed food, roof covering, and information. Brackenford offered all 3 reluctantly. The village occupied a rise above the marsh. Its cottages gathered around a stone church and a square well. Conversations paused as Martha entered the baker's shop. News of the will had arrived before her. Mrs. Lyle, the baker, said Hollowbrook's well had killed people during the fever year and advised Martha to leave before the cottage did the same. Martha offered to sort a basket of dried herbs in exchange for yesterday's bread. Mrs. Lyle challenged her to identify them. Martha separated useful comfrey from foxglove, explained that both could harm when misused, and discarded a bundle contaminated by mold. The baker's skepticism softened. She gave Martha bread, onions, and a heel of cheese, then warned her that Percival's mill foreman had asked whether she had entered the cellar. The foreman's name was Gideon Rusk. Martha found him outside the public house, wearing boots with triangular repairs on both heels. Rusk smiled when he saw her looking. Marsh mud ruins leather. So does trespassing. Martha replied. His smile vanished. He said the Ellison mill retained an easement over all water channels near Hollowbrook, and that she must not alter pipes, wells, drains, or springs. Martha asked to see the written easement. Rusk told her women who asked legal questions often regretted the answers. At the parish office, Clerk Edwin Sayer confirmed the unpaid rates, but allowed Martha to inspect the property schedule. Hollowbrook included 1 cottage, half an acre, the stone well, and the lower spring chamber with its conduits, cisterns, and dispensary fixtures. The phrase appeared in a hand older than the rest. A later note claimed the spring chamber had been permanently closed after contamination. No physician's report accompanied the note. Instead, the closure had been ordered by Percival's grandfather. Martha asked who occupied Hollowbrook before it was sealed. Sayer turned pages until he found the name Dr. Abigail Ellison. He immediately closed the book. There has never been a doctor in that family. Martha said, not one they acknowledge. Sayer replied. He refused to say more while another clerk listened. On her way back, Martha noticed medicinal plants growing along the flooded verge meadowsweet, watermint, and valerian. They formed a narrow green line leading from the village toward Hollowbrook. Even though surrounding vegetation had begun to die with autumn, the plants favored clean-moving water, not stagnant marsh. Kneeling, Martha pushed a stick into the soil. Beneath 6 inches of black mud, she struck flat stone. A buried channel ran beneath the lane. The cottage looked different when she returned. Not less ruined, but less random. Water pooled against the foundation because drains had been deliberately blocked. The warm copper pipe and buried channel suggested a spring still moved beneath the marsh. If Hollowbrook's well had been poisoned, perhaps the poison had entered after the original system was closed. Martha spent the afternoon making one room habitable. She covered the broken roof section with canvas bought on credit from Sayer's cousin, cleared the chimney throat, and raised her trunk on bricks above the damp floor. Under loose plaster near the hearth, she found 3 blue ceramic tiles set into the wall. Each carried a simple symbol, a leaf, a drop of water, and an open hand. The same symbols appeared faintly beneath the scratches on the cellar's black wax seal. It had never borne the Ellison crest. Someone had erased the emblem of another institution. At sunset, a knock sounded at the front door. Martha expected Rusk. Instead, she found a thin woman holding a feverish girl wrapped in a shawl. The woman introduced herself as Clara Knoll, a laundress. Mrs. Lyle had said Martha understood medicine. Clara's daughter, Anne, had been vomiting since drinking from the square. Well, Martha had little equipment, but she knew dehydration when she saw it. She boiled rainwater, mixed a careful solution of salt and sugar, cooled the child with damp cloths, and warned Clara that severe weakness required a physician. The nearest doctor demanded payment before visiting Marsh Cottages. Martha stayed with Anne through the night, giving small spoonfuls rather than the large draughts that triggered vomiting. Near dawn, the child's pulse steadied. Clara wept with relief. She offered Martha 6pence, nearly all she possessed. Martha accepted only enough to buy lamp oil. "Bring me water from your square well and from the stream above the mill," she said. "Use clean bottles and mark them." After they left, Martha discovered the black silk behind the cupboard had snapped. The cellar door remained closed, but the fresh scratches around its lock had multiplied. Someone had entered the cottage while she cared for Anne. Nothing visible was missing. On the floor lay a curl of gray sealing wax and a short strand of red wool, the same shade used in the livery of Ellison mill workers. Martha moved the cupboard again and examined the lock in daylight. It was not a common warded lock. 4 rotating brass rings surrounded the keyhole, each engraved with tiny plant symbol. An ordinary iron key could not open it until the rings were aligned. The long key Price had given her fit the central shaft, but the rings prevented it from turning. She compared the symbols with her mother's herbal guide: willow, rosemary, rue, and lavender repeated in different sequences. On the blue tiles near the hearth, the leaf symbol contained 4 tiny cuts long. Short, short, long. Not decoration, she realized, but in order. She set the rings to willow, rosemary, rosemary, willow. The key turned 1/4 and stopped. From below came 3 knocks. Faster now, and a thin thread of clear water appeared beneath the door. Martha tasted none of it. She collected several drops on a clean spoon. The water was warm and carried no marsh odor. When it dried over the fire, it left a pale mineral ring rather than dark organic residue. A spring lay beyond the door. Before she could try another sequence, wheels approached along the lane. Percival stepped from a carriage with Price and Gideon Rusk. He carried a document offering to purchase Hollowbrook for £5, enough to clear the rates and leave Martha a modest remainder. "You called it worthless 3 days ago," she said. Percival glanced at the wet line beneath the cellar door. "I have decided charity should not become cruelty." Martha refused. Price would not meet her eyes. Percival increased the offer to £20, then 50. Each increase exposed more fear. When Martha still refused, he told her the parish would auction the cottage after 30 days, and that anything she discovered would pass to the buyer, unless I pay the rates. With what Martha looked at the cottage, the leaking roof, and the door sealed by a symbol his family had tried to erase. With work, Percival's expression hardened. Before leaving, he instructed Rusk to post a notice forbidding interference with Ellison Waterworks. Price lingered at the gate. In a voice Percival could not hear, he said, "The second ring is not rosemary." Then he followed the carriage, leaving Martha with a warning disguised as help, and one urgent question if the second symbol was wrong. Which plant had Abigail Ellison intended her successor to choose? Martha returned to her mother's guide. Willow appeared beside remedies for pain and fever. Rosemary appeared beside preservation and memory. Rue signified regret and danger. Lavender signified cleanliness. The blue tile pattern was not long and short. Under magnification from a water-filled glass, she saw the cuts differed in shape. Leaf, flame, drop, leaf. The rings had to be set by purpose. Not plant name. Pain. Preservation. Cleanliness. Pain made no sense. But willow, rosemary, Leandre. Willow did. She aligned the rings. The key turned fully. The black wax cracked around the frame. Warm air moved through the cottage, carrying rosemary, camphor, spirits, and something sharper that reminded Martha of the lime solution her mother used to scour sickroom floors. She opened the door only a hand's width. Stone steps descended into darkness. Halfway down, a copper rod moved against a pipe. Producing the 3 knocks, Martha tied a rope around her waist, secured it to the hearth beam, and descended with 2 candles. The steps ended at a stone, landing above shallow running water. The cellar was larger than the cottage. Its arched ceiling supported by brick columns. Copper pipes crossed the walls. Glazed ceramic jars stood on raised shelves. Protected from damp, a long table held glass bottles wrapped in straw, rolls of linen sealed in tin, and a copper instrument for boiling surgical tools. This was not a family wine cellar. It was a dispensary. At the center stood a locked cabinet bearing the leaf, drop, and open hand emblem. Its door had been battered recently but held firm. On the wall above it, faded lettering remained legible. Hollowbrook Women's Relief Room. Clean water, clean hands, care without debt. Martha felt the room shift around her. Her in-laws had not sealed an embarrassment or a worthless store. They had buried a place created to treat people the Ellison family preferred not to see. A metallic scrape came from the staircase. Martha raised her candle. The cellar door was closing above her. She ran, but the door struck its frame before she reached the upper steps. The iron key turned from the outside. Rusk had entered through the rear window and used the key Martha had left in the lock. He dragged the cupboard against the door, then stamped across the floor with no effort to hide his presence. Martha pulled the rope tied around her waist. It ran beneath the door to the hearth beam. Rusk had not noticed it. She yanked twice. Dislodging the poker, she had balanced against the cupboard leg. The iron bar fell with a crash. Rusk stopped. Martha shouted that Clara Knoll knew she was below and would bring the parish constable if she failed to appear by noon. It was a lie, but a plausible one. Rusk cursed. The cupboard scraped aside. He unlocked the door and waited at the top with a mallet. Martha climbed only until her head was level with the floor. "Mr. Percival wants what is in the cabinet," he said. "Open it. And you may keep your cottage. If he knew how to open it, you would not need me." Rusk's eyes moved to the herbal guide on the table. Martha understood that the family possessed fragments of Abigail's instructions, but not the full system. Her own training allowed her to read symbols they had dismissed as women's household knowledge. Rusk reached down. Martha threw the contents of her candle snuffer into his face. Hot ash blinded him long enough for her to climb past, seize the poker, and force him toward the broken rear room. She did not have his strength, but she had the advantage of knowing which floorboards were rotten. Rusk stepped backward onto one she had marked with chalk. His boot crashed through. He fell to his thigh. Dropping the mallet, Martha opened the rear door and ordered him out. Rusk threatened to return with authority. She answered that the triangular boot prints, broken window, and red wool on the cellar floor would interest that authority. He left limping. Martha secured the cottage as well as she could, then walked to Sayer's office carrying the mallet and red thread. Rusk had already told the village she attacked him while he inspected a company water pipe. Sayer advised her to make a written complaint before Percival's version hardened into accepted fact. Martha dictated every detail, including the words Rusk used about the cabinet. Sayer signed as recorder and gave her a copy. She also asked to inspect the parish death register from the fever year. Sayer resisted until Clara Knoll arrived with Anne. Now, sitting upright and asking for bread, Clara publicly thanked Martha for saving her daughter. The clerks who had ignored the widow began listening. Sayer brought the register. 37 years earlier, 16 women and 9 infants died during 6 weeks in Brackenford. Most addresses clustered around the square well and Ellison Mill cottages. No death occurred at Hollowbrook. Then the record changed. Abigail Ellison was accused of practicing medicine without lawful standing. Hollowbrook closed. Within 1 month, the property's clean spring conduit was transferred to the Ellison wool mill. Deaths from bowel fever continued for another year. Martha copied dates and addresses. She did not yet know whether the spring diversion caused the illness, but the pattern demanded investigation. Clara offered to ask laundresses which wells produced yellow stains, oily films, or foul smells. Women who washed hundreds of sheets knew the village water better than any surveyor. To pay the rates, Martha needed steady income. She cleaned the front room, repaired a shelf, and placed a handwritten notice at the bakery: simple sickroom care. Herbal preparations, clean dressings, fair payment or exchange. She promised no miracles and treated no condition beyond her knowledge. For serious cases, she urged families to seek a physician. Some mocked the notice. Others arrived after dark to avoid being seen. Martha earned pennies tending burns, cleaning infected cuts, and preparing willow bark tea in measured doses. She kept names, symptoms, treatments, and payments in a ruled notebook. Patterns emerged. Mill workers suffered skin sores after handling wet wool. Children near the square well-developed stomach illness. Families uphill from the mill remained healthier. The evidence was not yet proof, but it pointed in one direction. Clara returned with 12 labeled water samples. Martha heated equal amounts in clean spoons. Water from the upper stream left a light mineral trace. Water below the mill left brown residue with an acrid smell. The square well sample produced the same brown stain, while the drops from beneath the cellar door remained clear. The buried spring channel had once supplied the village with water protected from industrial runoff. Samuel's final letter contained a line Martha had never understood. If you ever find yourself with Hollowbrook, trust what your mother taught you before you trust what my family tells you. Samuel knew the cottage mattered. Why had he said nothing while alive? Perhaps he knew only a rumor. Perhaps he feared Percival. Or perhaps his death had come before he could explain. The locked cellar cabinet opened with a second botanical sequence. This time, Martha used the words on the wall: clean water, clean hand, care without debt. The matching plants were watermint, Leonor, and comfrey. Inside were no coins. Tin drawers contained copper printing plates, bundles of patient records, labeled packets of dried specimens, and notebooks wrapped in oilcloth. The upper shelves remained dry because vents carried spring-warmed air around the cabinet. Abigail Ellison's handwriting was small and disciplined. Her notebooks described washing hands and instruments with boiled water and chlorinated lime before attending births. She recorded fewer fatal fevers after adopting the practice. She also mapped the Hollowbrook spring and designed a hydraulic ram that moved water uphill without steam. The knocking pipe was not a signal. It was the surviving pump, still cycling after decades. The later notebooks revealed conflict. Abigail's brother, Percival's grandfather, wanted the spring diverted to wash wool at the growing mill. Abigail refused because the village depended on it. She established the Women's Relief Room and drafted a trust assigning the spring's use, cottage income, and certain mill fees to free maternity care. Her brother accused her of causing the fever outbreak, sealed the dispensary, and removed her name from family records. But the notebook ended before the legal trust was completed. The final page read, original executed instrument placed where heat cleanses without flame. Parish duplicate lodged under Eastern number. If they close this room, the water will remember. Martha examined the copper sterilizer. Its double wall could conceal a document, but opening it without knowing the construction might destroy whatever lay inside. Eastern number could refer to a registry, grave, field, or building. The notebooks gave truth but not legal ownership. Percival responded to her complaint by filing a claim that the cellar fixtures belonged to Ellison Mill under the water easement. Price delivered the notice personally. He looked exhausted. Did Samuel know about Abigail? Martha asked. Price said Samuel found references in old account books shortly before becoming ill. He asked Price to search the family papers. Percival discovered the request, removed several boxes, and dismissed it as grief-driven curiosity. Samuel made Price promise that if Hollowbrook ever passed to Martha, the deed must include every chamber and water right. Then, my husband changed the will. He persuaded his father to restore an older clause, Percival thought the cottage remained worthless. Martha asked why Price had helped seal the cellar. He admitted witnessing a contractor apply black wax 8 years earlier, after subsidence exposed the stair. Percival's father feared villagers would enter. Price never saw the room. His warning at Ellison House was the most courage he had managed. Courage after harm is still a debt. Martha said, "You may begin paying it by finding Abigail's Eastern number." Price agreed to search the county deed index. But he warned that Percival would not wait. Hollowbrook's rate deadline was 19 days away. Work on the cottage advanced by necessity, not magic. Owen Vale, an elderly mason whose wife Martha treated for an ulcerated leg, inspected the roof. He marked the front room safe, the rear wall unstable, and the chimney repairable. Martha could afford only tarred cloth and 6 reclaimed slates. Owen taught her to clear the gutters and cut a shallow drain around the foundation. Clara organized 3 laundresses to remove marsh silt in exchange for future access to the clean spring if Martha restored it. The first cleared drain lowered water around the cottage by 2 inches. Beneath the mud, they uncovered a stone basin bearing the leaf, drop, and hand emblem. A capped pipe led toward the village. Another led uphill toward Ellison Mill. The uphill line was newer and crudely joined to Abigail's system. At night, Martha read the notebooks. Abigail's patients had included unmarried mothers, mill girls, servants, and wives whose husbands refused medical fees. She accepted eggs, sewing, vegetables, or nothing. Her records were clinical but compassionate. Beside each death, she wrote what might have prevented it. Beside each recovery, she credited clean practice, nourishment, and time rather than divine favor or her own brilliance. Martha felt a kinship that frightened her. Abigail's purpose could consume a life. Martha had little money, uncertain standing, and no physician's credential. Preserving the work required humility about what she could and could not do. One afternoon, Ann Nall burst into the cottage shouting that men were breaking the spring basin. Martha ran outside. Rusk and 2 mill laborers had removed the cap from the uphill pipe and were fitting an iron valve. Rusk displayed Percival's easement notice. Martha showed her deed. "The chamber and conduits within my boundary are mine." Rusk opened the valve. A rush of dirty water came backward from the mill line, filling the stone basin with brown foam. The smell matched residue from the square well. He called it harmless wash water. Martha filled a clear bottle before he could stop her. The liquid contained wool grease, and something caustic enough to redden her skin through a glove. If that line leaked into the village channel, the square well's contamination was no mystery. Rusk knocked the bottle away. It shattered on stone. Clara had already filled another behind him. The laundresses carried the sample to Sayer's office with 6 witnesses. By evening, the parish ordered the new valve closed, pending inspection. Percival lost a small contest, and his next move became more dangerous. He visited Martha after dark, without servants. He offered £200 for Hollowbrook, and promised to withdraw every claim. The amount could have secured Martha for years. "Why is a $3 cottage worth £200? She asked. Percival said sentiment had distorted her judgment. Abigail's records, if public, could damage the family name and threaten hundreds of mill jobs. He framed concealment as protection of workers. Martha asked whether Samuel's illness had been connected to his search. Percival's controlled expression slipped. Samuel had worked briefly in the mill office. His cough began after entering an archive room contaminated by chemical fumes. Percival said it was an accident. Which archive? Percival refused to answer. He gave Martha until morning to accept the offer. As he left, she noticed the same acrid brown stain on the cuff of his glove that appeared in water below the mill. That night, someone set fire to the stack of dry reeds beside Hollowbrook. The wind pushed flames toward the tarred roof. Martha rang a handbell until Clara's family and nearby cottagers arrived with buckets. The marsh supplied abundant water, but poor access. They cut a fire break, soaked the cottage wall, and saved the front room. The rear roof collapsed. Among the burned reeds, Owen found a rag smelling of lamp oil and bearing a strip of red mill wool. Martha added it to her evidence, but arson was difficult to prove. Rusk claimed vagrants had camped near the marsh. The fire cracked an exterior section of cellar masonry. Behind it appeared a narrow vertical shaft lined with glazed brick. Warm spring vapor rose through it. Martha lowered a weighted string and heard it strike metal 12 feet below. Abigail had built more than a cellar dispensary. A second chamber lay beneath the spring basin. The next morning, Brackenford's church bell rang before dawn. 3 families near the square well had fallen ill. By noon, there were 11 cases. The village physician called it seasonal stomach fever and advised prayer, rest, and diluted laudanum. Martha saw the same signs Anne had shown, but more severe. She asked the parish to close the square well until its water was tested. Percival's representative argued that panic would harm the mill. Sayre hesitated. Then Clara poured a bottle of square well water into a white bowl. Brown threads settled at the bottom. The parish closed the well for 48 hours. Families crowded Hollowbrook because the upper spring lay 2 miles away. Martha could provide boiled rainwater only in small quantities. The sealed clean spring beneath the cottage might save them, but opening the system without a plan could mix it with contaminated mill runoff. Abigail's diagrams showed a separation valve in the lower chamber. Reaching it required descending the vapor shaft. Owen warned that the cracked masonry might collapse. Martha tied herself to 2 ropes, wrapped her hands, and climbed down iron rungs revealed beneath mineral scale. The lower chamber was circular, waist-deep in clear warm water. 3 pipes entered it. Their valves carried the familiar plant symbols. 1 line fed Hollowbrook, 1 ran to the village, and 1 had been forced toward the mill. The mill valve was jammed open by a steel wedge, stamped Ellison Work. Dirty water seeped backward around it. Martha could remove the wedge, but pressure might throw it with deadly force. She studied Abigail's diagram by lantern and opened the relief pipe first. The chamber knocked 3 times as pressure dropped, then Martha pulled the wedge free. Brown water stopped entering. Clear spring water rose through the central grate. Martha opened the village valve slowly. Far above, Clara shouted that water had begun flowing from the old stone spout beside the church. For 2 days, Hollowbrook became an emergency refuge. Martha boiled instruments, mixed rehydration drinks, isolated severe cases, and recorded every symptom. She sent the worst patients to the physician and challenged him when he prescribed doses she believed dangerous. He resented her but could not deny that families using spring water recovered faster and no new cases appeared among them. Martha spent the money intended for rates on coal, linen, and food. She knew exactly what the choice meant. Saving the cottage had become inseparable from using it for Abigail's purpose. If the parish auctioned Hollowbrook, she might lose the very place whose water had saved the village. On the 3rd night, Martha entered the cellar and found the locked cabinet open. Abigail's final notebook and several copper plates were gone. On the table lay Samuel's last letter, removed from Martha's herbal guide upstairs. Across it, someone had written in brown ink, "You have 7 days to leave." The intruder had known where Martha kept the letter and how to bypass both botanical locks. Only someone who had studied Abigail's system or watched Martha closely could have done it. Rusk was capable of force, not patience. Price possessed legal knowledge but denied entering Hollowbrook. Percival knew more than he admitted. Martha examined the brown ink. It contained a glittering black sediment and smelled faintly metallic. Unlike her own writing ink, mill clerks used iron-rich ink manufactured in Ellison's dye room because it resisted damp. Nothing else had been taken. The thief wanted the final notebook and selected printing plates, perhaps those identifying the trust or spring routes. The remaining patient records still established Abigail's work, but without a legal instrument, Percival could call them private family papers unlawfully withheld. Martha reported the theft. The constable asked why a thief would leave valuable glass and copper but steal old writing. His skepticism changed when Sayre confirmed the water dispute, and Clara described the fever cases. He recorded the complaint but would not search Ellison House without stronger cause. Price arrived that afternoon carrying a copied index from the county registry. Abigail's Eastern number referred to East Record Volume 12. Entry 418. The entry title read, Hollowbrook Women's Relief Trust. Acknowledged by Abigail Ellison and 2 witnesses. The actual deed packet was missing. A notation stated it had been withdrawn for correction by family solicitor Matthew Ellison and never returned. Percival's grandfather, Martha said. Price nodded. Registry records proved a trust had been presented but not what its final terms were. To enforce it, they needed the executed original, a verified duplicate, or enough secondary evidence to reconstruct its provisions. Abigail's note said the original was placed where heat cleanses without flame. Martha had assumed the copper sterilizer, but its water jacket was empty. Heat without flame could also mean the warm spring chamber. She descended again with Owen and inspected the submerged pipes. One brass cylinder in the central grate remained warmer than surrounding metal. It resembled a filter housing. Yet water passed around rather than through it. Removing it required shutting the village valve. With fever still present, they could not interrupt clean water for more than minutes. Martha organized filled barrels above, posted Clara at the spout, and loosened the corroded retaining ring. The cylinder resisted. Water pressure built against her wrists. On the third attempt, it released suddenly, knocking her into the chamber wall. Owen hauled her up by the rope before she lost consciousness. The brass cylinder contained mineral stones and nothing else. Martha's disappointment was sharp. Then she noticed one stone was hollow and much lighter than the others. Inside lay a tightly rolled strip of parchment protected by beeswax. It was not the trust deed. It was a list of 27 names, most belonging to women in Abigail's patient records. Beside each name appeared a number and a small drawing of an open hand. The numbers matched neither dates nor payments. Clara recognized several surnames still present in Brackenford. Miss Esther Rowan, the church schoolteacher, helped compare them with old baptism books. Each number corresponded to a page in the parish's Eastern burial register. On those pages, the women's names appeared as witnesses to births and deaths during the fever year. Abigail had built a chain of ordinary witnesses so the family could not erase her work by destroying one document. Only 2 of the witnesses might still be alive. Lydia Wren? No. Martha caught herself before accepting the copied surname, which was actually Lydia Wynne and Margaret Dole. Lydia had moved to Carlisle. Margaret lived in the parish poorhouse and suffered lapses of memory. Martha visited Margaret with Esther, bringing no document at first. They asked about Hollowbrook. Margaret remembered warm water, blue tiles, and Abigail insisting every attendant wash before touching a mother. She remembered signing something on a spring morning. When shown the open hand symbol, she recited words learned decades earlier: water for the sick, skill for the willing, debt for no woman. Margaret's memory alone could not prove a deed. But she identified the second witness as Lydia Wynne and recalled that Abigail gave each woman a small printed card bearing the trust promise. Margaret's card had been sewn into her wedding Bible, later stored by her niece. The niece found it between 2 pages. The paper matched surviving copper plates in Hollowbrook, and its printed text named the trust: Spring, Cottage, Dispensary, and a 1% levy on Ellison wool washing. It was not the full deed, but it corroborated the registry entry and Abigail's notebooks. Martha needed Lydia's testimony. Carlisle required a day's travel and money she no longer had. Villagers whose relatives recovered from the fever collected fares in a jar at Mrs. Lyle's bakery. Some gave pennies. Some contributed nothing. Several mill foremen warned workers that assisting Martha might cost employment. Fear divided Brackenford, but it no longer silenced everyone. Before Martha could leave, a notice appeared on Hollowbrook's door. The parish rates had been purchased by Ellison Mill, which now demanded immediate repayment plus legal fees. Percival had acquired the debt and petitioned for auction in 5 days. Sayer protested that Martha's deadline had not expired. But Percival claimed emergency repairs to the village water line created additional charges secured against the property. The charges were false. The village, not Ellison Mill, had maintained the temporary spout, yet challenging them required a hearing scheduled the same morning as the only affordable train to Carlisle. Martha considered staying. Without Hollowbrook, Lydia's testimony might protect a trust controlled by whoever bought it. Likely Percival. Without Lydia, the court might treat the trust as unfinished. Esther offered to represent Martha at the rate hearing with Price while Martha traveled. Price was not trusted, but his profession allowed him to address the magistrate. Martha gave them every copied record and kept originals inside a tin case strapped beneath her dress. On the train, she noticed a man in a red wool scarf move between carriages whenever she looked up. At Carlisle station he disappeared. Martha reached Lydia Wynne's address and found the house emptied. A neighbor said a well-dressed gentleman had collected the elderly woman that morning, claiming her family requested her removal. The red-scarfed man waited across the street. Martha entered a grocer's shop and asked to use the rear door. The owner refused until she showed the parish list and explained that an old woman might be in danger. His wife led Martha through a storeroom into an alley. They reached the nearest police station, where Martha reported a possible coercive removal. The desk sergeant was reluctant until she named Price, and the pending magistrate hearing, a constable accompanied her back. The neighbor remembered the carriage crest, a black ram, used by Ellison Mill. Stable records showed the carriage was bound for a private boarding house outside the city. There they found Lydia in a locked upstairs room, frightened but unharmed. Percival's agent had told her Hollowbrook water poisoned children, and that Martha intended to blame her. Lydia was 81, physically frail and mentally clear. She remembered Abigail as the first person who treated servant women with the same clean linens used for wealthy patients. Lydia had witnessed the trust and kept her printed card inside a sewing chest. More importantly, she remembered a duplicate deed being sealed inside the mother book. A register of births kept at Hollowbrook. Percival's agent had searched her luggage for the card, but missed it, stitched beneath the chest lining. The constable took statements. Lydia agreed to return with Martha. Not because she expected reward, but because Abigail had once told her truth required maintenance just as Wells did. Neglect allowed both to foul. They reached Brackenford after nightfall. Esther met them with devastating news. The magistrate postponed the auction for 48 hours, but granted Ellison Mill temporary control of the water conduits. Rusk's men had entered Hollowbrook under the order. They broke shelves, removed jars, and flooded the lower chamber by reopening the mill valve. The hidden dispensary stood ankle-deep in brown water. The mother book was gone. Martha waded through the cellar, lifting soaked records onto tables. Mineral mud stained Abigail's pages. The copper sterilizer had been overturned. Broken glass covered the floor. Percival had achieved what 37 years of sealing had not: the deliberate destruction of a medical archive. Martha's composure failed. She sat on the cellar stairs and wept for Samuel, for Abigail, and for every patient whose name dissolved into brown water. She had spent her rate money helping the village and returned to find the cottage nearly lost. Competence did not make grief painless. Evidence did not become safe merely because it was true. Lydia sat beside her. Abigail lost this room once, she said. She did not leave us only one copy. The surviving women organized a rescue. Esther brought blotting paper from the school. Mrs. Lyle supplied clean cloth. Owen built drying racks. Clara and the laundresses rinsed mud from glazed jars without disturbing labels. Martha directed the work using techniques her mother taught for drying herb sheets. No direct fire. Steady air. Absorbent layers changed frequently. They could not save everything, but they saved more than Percival expected. The 3 knocks returned beneath the flood. The hydraulic pump continued cycling against the reopened valve. Martha closed the contaminated line with the parish inspector present, documenting its steel wedge and mill stamp. The inspector collected water from both sides of the valve in sealed bottles. Inside the overturned sterilizer, Martha discovered a false copper bottom crushed along one edge. It had been empty when she first examined the water jacket because the compartment opened from beneath. Rusk's violence revealed what careful inspection had missed. A narrow cavity contained fragments of green bookcloth and one brass clasp. The mother book had once been hidden there, but someone removed it before Abigail sealed the room. Lydia remembered Abigail giving a large green register to a young solicitor's clerk on the last day Hollowbrook operated. The clerk's name was Henry Price, Alden's father. Martha confronted Price in his office. He denied knowing the register's location, then unlocked a private cabinet and produced a sealed envelope addressed in his father's hand, to be opened only if Hollowbrook passes outside Ellison control. Price had discovered the envelope after Samuel's death but feared opening it. Martha's deed placed Hollowbrook outside control. Yet Price delayed because Percival threatened to expose irregularities in his father's old practice. His cowardice had cost time and evidence. Inside the envelope was a key, a warehouse receipt, and a confession. Henry Price had taken the mother book for safekeeping, deposited it in a bank document room under East, number 418, and falsely told Abigail it was registered when Percival's grandfather threatened him. Henry concealed the receipt but did not complete the filing. He spent the rest of his life collecting fees from the Ellisons while telling himself the book remained safe. The bank would release the box only to a trustee, court officer, or person named on the receipt. The named person was Abigail Ellison, long dead. Martha needed an emergency court order based on evidence that she was lawful custodian of Hollowbrook and the trust property. Percival's lawyers opposed the request, arguing no valid trust existed. At the hearing, Price testified to his father's confession, accepting that it might destroy his own reputation. Lydia identified her signature on the printed card. Margaret Dole repeated the trust promise. Sayre produced the registry index. The parish inspector described the stamped mill wedge and contaminated backflow. These pieces did not yet prove every term, but together they persuaded the magistrate to open the bank box under court supervision. The mother book lay inside, wrapped in waxed linen. Its first half recorded births, treatments, and outcomes. The second half contained the trust deed folded into a recessed cover. It bore Abigail's signature, those of Lydia and Margaret, Henry Price's acknowledgement, and the Ellison family seal used before it was scratched from Hollowbrook's wax. The deed assigned the cottage, spring, dispensary equipment, and a continuing fee on commercial use of the water to the Hollowbrook Women's Relief Trust. Custodianship passed to any lawful owner who maintained the property for public care. If the Ellison family obstructed the trust, their private right to draw water from the spring ended. Percival had inherited the mill, but his family's attempted erasure activated the clause that threatened its cheapest water source. The magistrate suspended Ellison Mill's conduit control and postponed the auction until title questions were resolved. It was a major victory, but the trust had no cash. Decades of unpaid fees required accounting and litigation. Hollowbrook still owed valid parish rates. The roof remained broken. The fever cases consumed supplies. A document created possibility, not instant restoration. Percival changed strategy. He circulated notices, claiming Martha planned to close the mill and starve Brackenford. Workers who had supported her found themselves removed from shifts. Clara's husband lost 2 days' wages. Stones struck Hollowbrook's window at night. Someone painted witch water across the front wall. Martha called an open meeting in the church hall. She presented the deed, accounts, and spring diagrams for anyone to inspect. She proposed that the mill continue drawing water at the trust rate while installing a separate waste channel and allowing independent inspection. The fee would support the clinic, spring maintenance, and compensation for families harmed by contamination. She did not ask the village to choose between work and clean water. Percival had created that false choice. Several workers remained hostile. One man asked whether Martha could guarantee their wages. She admitted she could not. Another asked whether she intended to become rich. Martha opened her rate account and showed every penny received and spent. Transparency did not win everyone, but it prevented Percival from filling silence with invention. The turning point came when the inspector's laboratory report arrived. Ellison wash water contained a lump, dye residue, animal grease, and dangerous bacterial contamination from drainage shared with the square well. The clean spring itself was safe. Mill modification, not Hollowbrook medicine, caused the fever pattern. The county health board ordered the contaminated line closed. Percival blamed Martha. Then Samuel's death certificate surfaced among mill clinic records, delivered anonymously to Price. The certificate listed lung fever, but the physician's draft notes described chemical burns in Samuel's airways after entering the dye archive. Someone had removed that detail from the official copy. The anonymous packet also contained 3 pages from Abigail's stolen final notebook. On the back of one page appeared a fresh smear of Ellison mill ink. Whoever took the notebook now wanted Martha to know Percival had altered medical records across generations. The remaining pages had to be inside the mill. Martha would not break in. Instead, Price sought a preservation order based on the theft report and Samuel's altered certificate. The court authorized a constable and county inspector to search specific archive rooms. Percival delayed them for 6 hours, claiming a dye spill made entry unsafe. During the delay, smoke appeared above the eastern warehouse. The archive was on fire. Workers formed a bucket line. Percival ordered them to protect machinery before records. Daniel Knoll, Clara's brother, ignored him and broke the archive window. He and 2 others carried boxes into the yard until smoke forced them out. Martha treated burns and smoke inhalation from a safe station near the gate. She saw Rusk emerge from a side door without injury, carrying no papers. When the fire cooled, the inspector found a trail of lamp oil leading from the archive shelves. The stolen notebook's metal clasp lay beneath a burned desk. Most pages were destroyed, But the copper printing plates survived heat. One plate bore the entire water network. Another printed the trust motto. A third recorded fee calculations, showing the mill owed decades of spring payments. Rusk attempted to leave Brackenford that night. The constable stopped him at the station with Abigail's final notebook cover and Samuel's draft death certificate inside his case. He claimed Percival ordered him to burn everything. Percival denied it. Rusk's word alone might not convict him. But the mill account books contained payments labeled Eastern Maintenance on dates corresponding to cellar sealing, conduit altération, and the attempted purchase of Hollowbrook. Price recognized his own firm's invoices. The family had funded concealment through business accounts. The county scheduled a public inquiry into water contamination, evidence destruction, and fraudulent medical records. Percival still controlled the mill and could hire formidable counsel. Martha possessed truth, but truth had to survive cross-examination. The night before the inquiry, Martha found a final note inside Samuel's herbal bookmark. Moisture from the flooded cellar had loosened 2 layers of paper he had pasted together. Between them, he had written Abigail did not fail. Price has the mother book. Percival knows the water is fouled. If I cannot speak, let Martha read the patients, not the family. Samuel had been trying to guide her all along. At the inquiry, Percival's counsel attacked Martha first. He called her an unlicensed healer who exploited village illness to seize family property. He emphasized that she accepted payment, opened a sealed cellar, and altered water valves without formal engineering training. Martha answered plainly. She accepted pennies or barter for limited nursing care, referred severe cases to a physician, recorded every treatment, and opened the emergency spring only after contamination appeared in the public well. She did not pretend to be a doctor. Her restraint made exaggeration difficult. The county physician who had resented her testified that her hydration methods, isolation practices, and insistence on boiled water were sound. He admitted the square well closure came later than it should have. Ann Knowles' recovery did not prove every claim, but it established Martha acted before gaining any financial benefit. Percival's counsel argued that the mill contamination could have come from any village drain. The inspector presented matched samples from the backflow valve, mill wash channel, square well, and up a spring. The chemical and bacterial patterns traced contamination downstream from the mill connection. Abigail's diagrams explained how the forced valve allowed waste to enter the old public conduit. Then Lydia Wynne identified the trust deed and described its signing. Margaret Dole's printed card matched copper plates recovered from the fire. Sayre authenticated East Record Entry 418. The bank manager described continuous custody of the mother book. Price admitted his father's failure to register the deed fully and his own delay in revealing the envelope. Each witness carried a weakness. Together they formed a chain. Percival's greatest mistake came when he chose to testify. He said he had never known the lower spring chamber existed before Martha entered it. Price produced an invoice bearing Percival's signature for renewal of Hollowbrook lower seal 8 years earlier. Percival claimed he signed without reading. He then denied knowledge of the diverted conduit. The mill account book contained annual payments for Hollowbrook pressure gate maintenance authorized by his initials. He blamed clerks. Finally, he said Samuel never investigated Abigail. Martha submitted Samuel's hidden note, and Price described Samuel's request. Percival called the handwriting forged. A bank letter written by Samuel during the same week showed identical letter forms, ink, and paper. By denying everything, Percival converted every record into proof of deliberate deception. Rusk testified under caution. He admitted entering Hollowbrook, stealing the final notebook, reopening the contaminated valve, and setting the archive fire. He claimed Percival gave verbal orders but had no written instruction for arson. However, the threatening message left on Samuel's letter used mill ink, and a clerk testified that Percival took a bottle from the dye office on the evening it was written. Circumstance could not prove every act, but it established coordinated obstruction. Percival's counsel then produced what appeared to be the strongest evidence against Abigail, a physician's report dated the final week of Hollowbrook's operation. It accused her of administering an experimental tincture to 6 women who later died and recommended immediate closure of the dispensary. The signature belonged to Dr. Yossi Afen, a respected county physician of the period. If authentic, the report could transform Abigail from a victim of family greed into the cause of the tragedy. The paper had been recovered from an Ellison bank packet and carried an old wax seal. Percival's counsel asked Martha whether she still wished to praise Abigail's methods. Martha said praise was irrelevant, the report should be tested. She examined the listed tincture. It contained feverfew, willow, and 20 drops of spirits per dose. Abigail's notebooks used minims, drachms, and carefully stated strengths. Never the vague word drops because different bottles produce different amounts. The report also claimed all 6 women died within 2 days. Martha asked Cellar for the parish burial register and Esther for the mother book. 2 of the 6 names appeared in the mother book, giving birth months after their supposed deaths. A third signed Lydia Wynn's trust card the following year. 1 woman did die, but the burial register placed her death 3 weeks before the report claimed. Abigail treated her. The author had copied names from patient lists without checking chronology. Percival's counsel argued the dates could be clerical mistakes. Martha held the report near a window. Its paper bore a faint watermark, Brackenford Mill Fine. 1842. Abigail's dispensary closed in 1831. The report had been written on paper manufactured 11 years after its stated date. Price identified the hand as that of a clerk employed by Percival's grandfather during a later property dispute. The old wax seal was genuine because it had been lifted from another document and pressed into softened resin. A crack across its center aligned with a missing seal on one of Henry Price's archived letters. The attempted forgery did more than fail. It showed that someone inside the Ellison administration had constructed false medical evidence after Abigail's removal. Percival claimed no knowledge because the report predated his birth. Martha agreed that he could not have created it. Then asked why his counsel had received it from a private packet, opened only 2 weeks earlier. Percival had chosen to present a document without checking the women it declared dead. His need to discredit Abigail had overcome caution. The inquiry recessed while county officers secured the remaining family archives. During the break, a mill clerk named Thomas Reed approached Esther behind the church hall. He had prepared the packet for Percival and knew the report was suspicious. Percival ordered him to say it came from an untouched bank box. Reed refused to testify at first because his wife and parents lived in mill cottages. Esther brought him to Martha rather than pressuring him. Martha explained that the trust could not promise permanent wages or protect every witness from hardship. But the receiver could prevent retaliatory eviction while the inquiry remained active. Reed agreed to speak if his family received the same protection as other tenants, not special payment. His testimony established that Percival selected the forged report from a drawer marked contested papers and removed a note questioning its date. That note survived in Reed's wastebasket because he used the blank reverse to calculate coal deliveries. The handwriting belonged to Percival's late father Fenn, paper false. Never employ unless Hollowbrook claim revives. The family had known for at least 1 generation that the report was fraudulent and preserved it as a weapon. Percival employed it precisely when the old note warned. At sunset, while officers searched Ellison House, someone cut the rope controlling Hollowbrook's temporary spring gate. Clean water stopped at the church spout. Panic spread because fever families still depended on it. Martha left the inquiry with the inspector. Owen, Daniel, and Clara. The break was not inside the cellar. The rope had been severed where the conduit crossed a locked mill meadow. Percival's manager denied access. Citing private land, the magistrate issued an emergency order. By the time they entered, the conduit trench was filling with mill runoff. A wooden barrier had been placed upstream to force dirty water toward the broken gate. The sabotage resembled the original contamination, but occurred while county officers watched. Martha stopped anyone from opening the public valve. They isolated the damaged section, used stored barrels for patients, and dug a temporary bypass along the public lane. Men and women worked by lantern through the night. The bypass carried less water but kept the spout running. For once, the village did not wait for Ellison permission. Rusk was already in custody. Percival remained under observation in the hall. The sabotage had been ordered earlier or carried out by someone hoping to protect him. Mill payroll records showed the meadowkeeper received an unusual cash bonus that morning. Confronted with the barrier and cut rope, he admitted Percival told him to make Hollowbrook fail publicly if the inquiry turned against the family. The meadowkeeper's statement required corroboration, but the physical evidence was fresh, witnessed, and mapped. Martha's decision not to release questionable water prevented the incident from becoming the disaster. Percival intended. Her competence was no longer merely part of her own account. The inspector and half the village had observed it. When the inquiry reconvened, Martha's wet skirt was still marked with trench mud. Percival's counsel suggested her dramatic night had influenced public sympathy. The magistrate told her that preventing contaminated water from entering a public spout was not theater. It was the responsibility Percival's company had repeatedly refused. The inquiry's conclusions arrived in stages. Hollowbrook's title remained Martha's, subject to the public trust. Ellison Mill lost its private spring access until it built a safe, independent system. The company owed 6 years of recoverable fees, the legal limit available despite older records, plus compensation for recent contamination. A receiver took temporary control of the mill to protect wages while upgrades were made. Percival faced charges for conspiracy to destroy evidence, falsifying claims, and interfering with a public water source. Rusk faced arson, burglary, and contamination offenses. Price's professional conduct went before a disciplinary panel. Cooperation did not erase delay. No crowd erupted into simple celebration. Workers feared the receiver. Families mourned illness. Martha felt vindicated but not joyful. Justice was not a bell that rang once and repaired everything. It was a set of obligations now made visible. The first trust funds paid Hollowbrook's valid rates, medical supplies used during the fever, and urgent roof stabilization. Martha refused to use compensation for decorative restoration. Owens supervised timber braces and a weatherproof front roof. The rear room remained closed for months. Every expense appeared on a public board in the cottage. The trust appointed 5 stewards, as Abigail required Hollowbrook's lawful owner, 1 nurse or midwife, 1 mill worker, 1 parish representative, and 1 woman who had received relief. Martha served as owner and custodian. Clara represented recipients. The mill workers elected Daniel Knoll. Esther represented the parish until a formal vote. The county physician reluctantly accepted the medical seat after agreeing that nursing training would be valued rather than dismissed. Martha established boundaries. Hollowbrook would offer clean water, maternity support, basic nursing, and referral. It would not claim to cure every illness. Complex cases went to licensed physicians. Apprentices learned hygiene, record keeping, nutrition, wound care, and signs requiring urgent help. Abigail's notebooks became curriculum, but outdated remedies were not followed blindly. Her greatest legacy was method observe, record, compare, clean, and revise. The lower chamber's hydraulic pump required extensive work. Engineers found its brass ram worn but repairable. Instead of importing an expensive machine, they trained local smiths to reproduce parts. The restored pump supplied the church spout, Hollowbrook cistern, and a new public washhouse. The mill paid for a separate closed water circuit and waste channel inspected quarterly. Recovery took seasons. Some fever survivors remained weak. The damaged archive yielded only fragments. Hollowbrook's marsh garden required drainage channels cleared by hand. Martha planted medicinal herbs on raised beds where roots would not absorb contaminated water. She marked every plant with dosage warnings, refusing the romantic belief that natural meant harmless. The village's opinion changed unevenly. Mrs. Lyle began sending soup to patients. A farmer who once called Martha a parasite donated roof slate after his wife received care. Others continued to blame her for Percival's fall. One former foreman spat near her gate each market day. Martha did not measure success by universal approval. She measured clean water flow, fewer infections, balanced accounts, and women leaving Hollowbrook stronger than they entered. Price lost his right to practice independently for a year. During that time, he cataloged trust papers under supervision without fee. Martha required him to write a complete account of his delay, including how fear of professional embarrassment allowed harm to continue. He asked whether she would ever forgive him. Forgiveness is not another word for forgetting the cost. She said, "Do useful work and stop asking me to make you comfortable." He accepted the answer. Percival's trial occurred 9 months after the inquiry. The court convicted him of conspiracy to obstruct evidence and fraudulent interference with the water trust. Direct proof of ordering the archive fire remained insufficient for that charge. But business records and witness testimony established his role in the broader scheme. He lost control of Ellison Mill and paid penalties from his personal estate. His wife sold the London residence to satisfy claims Martha did not attend the sale. Rusk received a prison sentence. In his final statement, he said he obeyed because Percival could destroy any laborer's livelihood. The judge acknowledged coercive power, but noted that Rusk repeatedly chose escalation when lawful refusal and disclosure remained possible. Fear explained part of his conduct. It did not absolve it. The receiver kept the mill open under reduced hours during water system reconstruction. Trust funds supported families whose wages fell temporarily. When an employee cooperative later purchased a minority share, Daniel insisted safety records be available to workers. The arrangement did not transform the mill into paradise, but it broke the old system in which one family controlled work, housing, water, and truth. Martha received Samuel's small unpaid wage settlement and damages for wrongful expulsion from Ellison House. She placed half in personal savings, following Clara's insistence that service should not require permanent poverty. The other half repaired Hollowbrook's rear room into 2 clean convalescent chambers. She kept her own room modest but dry, with a real bed, a writing desk, and Samuel's letter framed behind plain glass. Lydia Wynne moved into a trust cottage near Brackenford. Her memory of Abigail filled gaps, no legal paper preserved. She described Abigail laughing when the first hydraulic pump sprayed mud across her dress, sitting beside frightened mothers through the night, and fighting with parish men who believed poor women should be grateful for any water. These stories prevented Abigail from becoming a flawless marble figure. She had been stubborn, impatient, sometimes wrong, and willing to correct herself. Margaret Dole visited the restored spring spout in summer. She placed her hand beneath the clear water and repeated the trust promise: water for the sick, skill for the willing, debt for no woman. Martha added one sentence to the public version: truth for everyone who depends upon it. Hollowbrook's first formal apprentice was Anne Knoll. Years before she was old enough for advanced nursing, she began by washing bottles, copying labels, and learning not to taste unidentified plants. Martha told her that the most dangerous healer was one who loved being admired more than being accurate. Anne rolled her eyes but wrote it down. The cottage itself changed without losing every scar. Owen repointed the stone with breathable lime mortar. Workers replaced only rotten beams. The black wax remained around part of the cellar frame behind protective glass, its scratched emblem visible. Visitors often asked whether Martha wished the Ellison crest had remained. She explained it had never been their crest. The leaf, drop, an open hand belonged to women whose labor the family tried to claim and erase. The sealed cellar became an archive and training dispensary. Surviving jars remained on raised shelves. The copper sterilizer was repaired, its false bottom left open to show where the mother book had once been hidden. Digital certainty did not exist in their age. Every document needed copies, witnesses, and known custody. Martha arranged for the trust deed to be registered properly, copied at the parish, held at the bank, and printed in the annual report. No future custodian would depend on one secret chamber. The final notebook remained incomplete. Several burned pages were unreadable. Rather than invent Abigail's missing conclusions, Martha published blank markers describing what was lost. Uncertainty honestly recorded was better than a satisfying falsehood. 1 year after the fever, Hollowbrook held a public review. The accounts showed spring fees, clinic expenses, wages, repairs, reserves, and outstanding debts. The number of severe waterborne illnesses had fallen sharply after the mill conduit closed. Maternal infections among women, assisted through Hollowbrook, also declined. Though Martha warned that 1 year was too little for grand claims, the county physician smiled when she said it. He had learned that her caution strengthened rather than weakened the work. After the meeting, Clara found Martha alone beside the lower chamber. Water struck the hydraulic ram in its familiar rhythm, 3 knocks. A pause. Then 3 again. "Does it still frighten you?" Clara asked. "No," Martha said, "but I remember when it did." The sound had once suggested something trapped in darkness. Now she understood it as pressure transformed into motion. Abigail designed a machine that used the force opposing it to lift water higher. Martha saw no perfect metaphor in that, only practical wisdom. Resistance could be used, but it still wore metal down. Pumps required maintenance. So did courage. Samuel's role became clearer through letters recovered from the mill fire. He had copied water accounts, questioned altered death records, and persuaded his father to restore Hollowbrook's broad deed clause. He did not tell Martha because he hoped to solve everything before placing her in danger. His secrecy protected her temporarily but also left her unprepared. Martha loved him without turning that mistake into nobility. Love could coexist with honest judgment. On the second anniversary of Samuel's death, Martha walked to the Hill Cemetery carrying Rosemary. The Ellison family plot stood behind iron railings. Percival's name had been removed from a charitable plaque but remained on the family stone. Martha placed no accusation there. She laid Rosemary at Samuel's grave and told him Hollowbrook was open. The parish later offered to rename the square spout after Martha. She declined. It became the Abigail Ellison Spring, with a smaller plaque listing Lydia Wynne, Margaret Dole, Rebecca Hale, Clara Knoll, Esther Rowan, and the unnamed women whose patient records survived. Martha's name appeared only as founding custodian of the restored trust. By the third spring, Hollowbrook's garden spread across land once dismissed as poisoned marsh. Reed beds filtered runoff before it reached the public channel. Raised plots supplied mint, leonda, feverfew, comfrey, and vegetables for patients. The cottage generated income through training fees, a modest dispensary, spring use payments, and textile washing contracts transferred to the public washhouse. No hidden fortune repaired it. Sustainability came from several ordinary sources, kept transparent. Martha sometimes remembered the will reading the lamps, the laughter, the 3-shilling alternative. People later claimed the Ellisons had accidentally given her a treasure. That version made a better village tale. But it was incomplete. They gave her a liability. Hollowbrook became valuable because Abigail's knowledge survived. Samuel preserved a legal opening. Witnesses remembered. Villagers took risks. And Martha chose to maintain what she found. On a cold evening, a young widow arrived at Hollowbrook carrying a baby and a letter of dismissal from her employer. She apologized for having no money. Martha showed her the open hand symbol above the door. Payment is not the first question here. Martha said, the first question is what you need. While Clara prepared warm food, Martha examined the child and listened to the mother's breathing. There was no dramatic discovery, no public audience, and no wealthy family to defeat. Only work, clean cloth, careful questions, warmth, and time. This was the legacy in its truest form. After they settled, Martha entered the cellar to check the spring gauges. The cabinet stood open. Abigail's notebooks had been copied, indexed, and returned to their shelves. The mother book rested in a fire-resistant iron case, but a public copy remained upstairs. Clean water moved through glazed channels beneath the floor. Martha touched the scar where black wax once sealed the door. Her in-laws had expected Hollowbrook to close around her like a grave. Instead, opening it forced a whole village to examine what had been buried beneath comfort, profit, and family pride. 3 knocks traveled through the pipes. Martha adjusted the pressure valve by half a turn. The church spout above would now run steadily until morning. She climbed the steps and left the cellar door open behind her. Warm, rosemary-scented air rose into the cottage. In the front room, the widow slept beneath a clean blanket while her child breathed quietly beside the fire. Outside, clear water crossed the square where the poisoned well had been sealed and continued toward homes that no longer depended upon Ellison permission. Martha closed the cottage door against the cold, not to hide what Hollowbrook contained, but to keep the warmth inside. The truth beneath the house was no longer a secret, the water no longer a private weapon, and the unwanted widow no longer waited for another family to decide her worth.